Alright, so this is going to be a shout out to all the ENFPs out there. I've seen a bunch of videos on the subject of INFJ and ENFP companionship and how they're the formidable duo that covers each other's cognitive blind spots and have a great time doing so. And you know what? For the most part, that's pretty true. And I too would like to add to this commentary about the strange and wonderful dynamic between ENFP and INFJ. But whereas most videos will describe this interaction with a tone that resembles a young newlywed in the honeymoon phase on the shores of frickin' Hawaii or something, not that there's anything wrong with that, I mean this dynamic is worthy of such description. I do want to give you a slightly different perspective on this pairing, something like a decades-old companionship. And for the record, I will not be delving into the technicality of cognitive functions. I mean, I'm still relatively new to that, and I want to let that brew in my mind before I could share anything in that regard. I'm just afraid that I'll say something wrong, and then the meteor falls down precisely where I am. I mean, I don't want to have that happen. I just got this car maintained. But I will say that I'm an INFJ, 4-wing 5 if you're into Enneagrams, EII if you're into socionics, and some of my best conversations have been with ENFPs. I've been close friends with an ENFP for over 17 years, so it's going to be an interesting challenge to tell about this pairing based purely on my experiences, theories, ideas, anecdotes, but I'm gonna take on that challenge anyway, so let's do that. Number 1. ENFPs and INFJs make excellent communicative companions and are a formidable conversational duo at that. When an ENFP speaks, I find that I very rarely interrupt them. I listen until they are finished with their train of thought, but not just because it would be rude to interrupt or anything, but because to me, they will give so much to work with. But it's not in any way a bad thing because in a sort of weird sense, the way they verbally articulate ideas is similar to the way I mentally begin to process those said ideas. So when I hear people say that they have a hard time catching up with someone like an ENFP in conversation, I'm like, what? And then I realize that many people are wired differently and then that's totally fine. In my experience, however, I've had no problem following along with their train of reason, and in fact, in real time, I would figure out some things to say that would add on to their point. Now, this is what I think is happening here. Can we bring up an illustration? Okay, thank you. You see this I'm just talking to myself. You see this pantry of ingredients? What I think is happening is that an ENFP would look at this and say to themselves, okay, so here's this and that, and this would combine to make apple pie, and these would combine to make soup. But do these ingredients always have to be made into this dish? Like, what if I want to make this, or this, or what if I wanted to add this? An INFJ would look at the same ingredients and think, okay, so here are ingredients. I'm understanding texture. I'm understanding different flavor profiles for each ingredient. I'm thinking about how these flavors and textures can come together to make a delicious experience. And then somehow we end up with a super burrito. It's this dynamic in which the ENFP will share a wide-casting, surface-level iteration of what we say, and in exchange, the INFJ will have a deep, focused, precise iteration of what they say. And it's not like one level of analysis is better than the other. I'm making this point to show how interesting it is to see how these ways of thinking complement each other so well. It's like, together we're not squares, we're cubes. And what happens is that we end up with a more fleshed out interpretation of the same observation. Even after processing our disagreements, we get away with an expanded version of our original ideas. We could never have done that on our own. With that being said, we could say both benefit from seeing the forest and the trees. And building off of this complementary dynamic, number 2, there is this instant, implicit, unspoken sense of trust and connection between these two personality types. I find that INFJs will open up to them way more than most other people, and I realize that ENFPs will open up to us way more than any other person. Contrary to popular belief, INFJs can definitely be spontaneous and act like complete dumbasses for the sake of hilarity and joy. But that element of spontaneity is always heavily suppressed under the weight of the rhythm and routine and maintenance of the demands of everyday life. And I hear that ENFPs can definitely be more analytical and serious, but that side of them is always thwarted by their social circle's perception of them as a spontaneous, bubbly, ditzy person. For both types, the sense of individual expression is constantly sort of pushed aside. The potential to be our true selves are not as realized as we would like, and as such, there's like this common distaste for the status quo that we live in. But when I hang out with an ENFP, there's no need for me to hide who I am. I can be spontaneous without any care of judgment. And when an ENFP wants to express individuality and express themselves, I'm like, hell yeah, do what you gotta do. It's more cool that way. We'll support you on that. We love that about you. We're honored to see that more authentic side of you. And that builds into my next point, number 3. It's really quite an adventure to get to know them and see how they really are. For example, I've been seeing a lot of videos about how they're super social and they're hyperactive and all that. And I'm here thinking, well, maybe, but that's not all there is to them. I find ENFPs to actually generally be a little bit more demure, even withdrawn at times. They seem to be the most introverted of all the extroverted types. I wasn't so surprised then when I found that a lot of my ENFP friends do need some time to themselves to reflect upon things. Between me and my ENFP friend, there will be times when he doesn't contact me or I don't contact him for weeks or even months, and that would be because we're both reflecting on stuff, or we're exploring places, or we're doing things on our own or with other friends. And it's pretty healthy. I mean, it doesn't have any impact on the way that we perceive each other. I mean, we just need time to ourselves. And all this talk about questioning their intelligence because apparently enthusiasm and a bubbly personality equates to stupidity is a complete myth, like Albert Einstein. A lot of ENFPs are smart. Some of the ENFPs I know will turn out to be my philosophical and intellectual sparring partners. Not suggesting that INFJs are smart. I mean, I'm for one pretty damn stupid sometimes. But it's just nice to share ideas with each other and cross-examine them. I also wasn't so surprised when I found that ENFPs are not always spontaneous. They're perfectly capable of adapting to a specific routine if what they wish to pursue resonates with who they are. I mean, if you really think about it, how is it possible for you to be spontaneous without the sense of stability and routine to cross-examine? You sort of need to have both. And in fact, that's what an ENFP has, and that's pretty cool. Number 4, I kind of envy them for being really sure of themselves and who they are, but at the same time, I really appreciate them for it. Observing them being sure of themselves. It's like an alternative mental framework for how I can see myself. I mean, holy frickin' smokes, it took me a metric fuck ton of writing before I could begin to be comfortable with how I define myself, let alone be in touch with it. For the ENFP, you all just get it. I often ask my ENFP friends, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you just not give a shit? Because that sense of assertive self-identity is still foreign to me. And then they would often tell me, you just do it, just be you. And I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to work with what you just said? And then I realized, well, you don't work with it, you just let it happen. Okay. Number 5, we are more willing than not to deal with each other's weaknesses and blind spots. I would go further to say that in a healthy dynamic, it's more than manageable. I would go even further to say that I enjoy the process of hashing out fundamental differences. I would go even further still and say that I enjoy our arguments. I will even enjoy the spice of a heated conflict that happens between us once in a blue moon. For example, there are times when I would visit my ENFP friend's house and walk into a bunch of fucking clutter, to which I asked them calmly, "Why the hell are your sweaters all over the floor? Why do you have candy wrappers on the bookshelf? How long has that been there? Are you gonna throw that loaf of bread away? It's starting to get moldy." You know, that INFJ nagging that we do when we're comfortable enough to do it. And then sometimes in deep conversation, when I get into my flights of fancy, I would just hear them ask me, like, why are you thinking about this and that? It has like nothing to do with you. Other times in points of tension and frustration, an ENFP would unintentionally conflate my contradictory trains of thought with an inconsistency of character. Meanwhile, as an INFJ, I would deflate an ENFP's ego by telling them, hey, you're kind of biting off more than you can chew, or you're doing too much, or you're neglecting yourselves, or you're neglecting your health. When we argue, it's like a tug of war between dream with me versus come back to earth. It's like a tug of war between we need to do this ASAP and fuck it, I want to do this instead. Hurtful as it might seem at the moment, it's unintentional. In hindsight, after careful reflection, we would sometimes concede and conclude that, well, maybe what the other person said was right the whole time. But in the face of what goes right in this dynamic, these blind spots are relatively minor issues, and they're really an opportunity for us to keep each other in check once in a while. I will go off on the tangent here and say that within the point of tension and potential turmoil, there exists a conflict between the need for stability and security and the desire for adventure. Shout out to Esther Perel. As I got older, I realized these two senses were fundamentally different from each other, yet serve as an integral part of what makes a person a person. It's weird to understand that these two natural needs may clash, but I've also realized that it's not so much of a conflict to resolve, but a paradox to be managed. I say this because in the dynamic between the ENFP and the INFJ, and especially a healthy one with time put in, we learn to dance with this paradox almost effortlessly. We wholeheartedly agree that time spent with each other is pretty damn surreal, but in the moments where that becomes suffocating, we understand that we need time alone from each other, experience things on our own, reflect on our own, because after a while when we hang out again, it's like we pick up where we left off and we catch up on what we learned in our time alone. In my opinion, this personality pairing is a rare example of a dynamic that places importance on growth and understanding. The sense of security established in a bond between us two companions, and the sense of adventure inherent in the natural need to express ourselves individually from one another. Even in those seldom moments where we clash and get into heated arguments, there is rarely a moment where those things are not at least partially resolved. And if they can't, it's simply a mutual acceptance that we are two entirely different people. But that doesn't take away from the spice of life that happens when these two friends meet and interact socially with each other. And what better way to experience this with an INFJ than with an ENFP? So yeah, those are all the things I love about ENFPs. Oh, by the way, do you like Ben & Jerry's mint chocolate cookie? It's kind of a running gag on this channel.